The presentation here today, I'm going to hand over to Curt Mason. We're very glad that he got up at, 1 o'clock in the morning?
About that.
Yeah, to drive here. So, anyway, he's a much better speaker than I am. I'd like you to welcome, please, give a round of applause, Curt Mason.
Folks, I can't tell you how excited I am to be here at Wings of Dreams. If you haven't seen this computer image that I have up here on the display, this is an ambitious design for a collection that deserves no less. The space artifacts that you'll see are absolutely fantastic to see preserved as Bob and his team have. This museum will serve to bolster the economy here in Stark, Florida, and I cannot wait to have a front row seat watching that happen. Who has gone and seen this thing, the big orange tank on the St. Johns River out there? Excellent. If you haven't done it yet, go check it out. You can walk right up to that thing, and Bob can show you right where it is. It's really a sight to see. This is what I do. So I'm a communicator out at Kennedy Space Center. I talk to the public every day as they visit our Space Center. And probably the most exciting thing that I do out at the Space Center is when we launch rockets, I get to do the launch commentary. And it's a real privilege to represent this enormous team of people that gets together to support these launches. And to be the one talking to all the thousands of people watching the launch is really a childhood thing. So, we're going to talk a little bit about my childhood and the steps that led me up to doing this kind of thing. I also have a website, projecthabu, Habu.com. Habu is the nickname of the Blackbird aircraft, which my grandfather had a little bit to do with. But on my website, I post my aerospace photography, take pictures of rocket launches. Been taking pictures for literally since before my memory starts, and so I just can't get enough of shooting photos of people with their airplanes, shooting photos of air shows. That air show down in Titusville is happening next weekend, so I'm going to be very busy next weekend as well. And my favorite thing to shoot is the Blackbird aircraft. There are 30 surviving Blackbird airplanes in the world, and I'm trying to take a picture of every single one of them. I've got 6 more to go. And just a couple of weeks ago, I was out taking that picture in Seattle. They've got Blackbirds all over the world, actually. And when people learn this about me, sometimes they say, "You're so lucky. You're so lucky." And maybe luck has a little bit to do with it, but that word luck, I think it discredits the hard work of the teams of people who inspired me to do what I'm doing today. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those individuals and some of the stories that inspired me, starting back even before I was born. People I must mention are my parents. Both of them are educators. My mother and father have been teaching in school for 30 and 40 years, respectively. And when my father, he was a science teacher, about halfway through his career, he applied for the Teacher in Space program. And of course, he didn't fly on that flight, but just the fact that he applied and was in the runnings is inspiring to any young man worrying about their own father. And that's the logo there for the Teacher in Space program. My dad's dad, he was jumping out of airplanes into Korea. He was an Army Air Corps paratrooper. So those war stories inspired me from a young age. But I'm going to talk the most about my maternal grandfather. He worked for the Lockheed Company. I was very close to him growing up, and I got to hear a lot of these stories firsthand, and I'm going to repeat to you the same stories that inspired me growing up. Now, my grandfather, he had a lot of design work in one of the first side-looking airborne radars. It's a mapping radar for reconnaissance purposes, for spying. He would fly in an airplane over enemy territory, look out to the sides of the airplane, and map all the military infrastructure. And they flew these radars over the Soviet Union in these RB-47 bomber aircraft. My grandfather actually had to ride along with these airplanes during their operational overflights over the Soviet Union. It was hairy business, and I'll tell you why. That RB-47, it has 3 ejection seats. The 2 seats up top there, the pilot and co-pilot, they fire upward like a normal ejection seat. But that navigator bombardier, his ejection seat fires down. There's a nickname for that type of seat. It's called a widowmaker. Not good. And the likelihood of all of this ejecting business was pretty high because these guys were trying to shoot them down. My grandfather's airplane had to beat feet from the MiG several times. But I haven't told you the best part yet. They didn't even give my grandfather an ejection seat. He was riding as a fourth crew member, sitting on the stairs next to the pilot and co-pilot seat there. They slapped a parachute on his back, and they said, when that nav bails out, just jump out of his hole there. Yeah, but fortunately, he never had to jump out. As many times as they ran from the MiGs, they were very blessed to get back home every time. Now, my grandfather had a lot of work with this reconnaissance equipment over the years, working for that Lockheed company. And some of his spy gear was installed inside this airplane. This is the first ever jet Air Force One. It's now on display at the Museum of Flight in Seattle. Now, this is the president's airplane, and it was first used during the Eisenhower administration. Eisenhower was going to fly into the Soviet Union and do some diplomatic talks with the leaders over there. And the CIA couldn't pass up the opportunity to put spy equipment on the president's airplane. And get this, they didn't even tell the president about it. Eisenhower never knew. But my grandfather was one of the engineers on the program, and they told him, you can talk to 3 people in the world about this, not including the president. This is the cockpit. You know, they had to hide the spy equipment from the president and also from the KGB. The Soviet intelligence folks were going to inspect the airplane when it landed. And so you see on the co-pilot side, on the right-hand side, there's a little air vent there. I'll zoom in on it for you. To activate the reconnaissance systems, the co-pilot would rotate that air vent as if he's just adjusting the airflow, like you do on an airliner. Yeah. Yeah. And the president never knew about it. But unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, depends on how you look at it, this thing never went operational. It never did an operational overflight in the Soviet Union because this man got shot down. This is Francis Gary Powers. He was flying in a U-2 over that Soviet Union, and a surface-to-air missile got him. This was just a couple of weeks before the president's plane was supposed to go in there. Never happened. Later on, some of my grandfather's patents were being considered for use in the space shuttle program. That shuttle ended up having about 2.5 million parts. A lot of those parts move. My grandfather, his little invention measured vibrations in different parts of an airplane. And NASA was considering this piece for use in the shuttle. And ultimately wasn't included, but he had a lot of fun working with the NASA teams trying to figure out how to fit his little piece into the puzzle. Now, they gave my grandfather about a week at Kennedy Space Center to do some engineering and fit that little piece into the puzzle. And while he was at the Space Center, they gave him a tour. That was the highlight of his visit. And as a matter of fact, this man gave my grandfather a tour. This is Chris Kraft. He was our first flight director, and he brought the idea of mission control to NASA. So Chris guided my grandfather all over the Space Center and even took him inside that vehicle assembly building and gave him a ride in the overhead breach crane in the building that they use for stacking up the rockets. So Chris and my grandfather got a bird's eye view of one of the Saturn V's getting ready for flight. I am so intensely jealous that I didn't get to do that, you know. This is where the story gets fun, okay? After the tour, my grandfather made a big mistake. He went back to the hotel where his 5 kids and his wife had been waiting for him all day. They didn't get to go on the tour. And of course, over the dinner, my grandfather felt the need to tell them about all this amazing stuff that none of them got to see. And then my grandfather said something those kids could have gone their whole lives without hearing. He said, when we were up in the crane, Chris asked me, where's your family? You could have brought your kids along on the tour. Ouch. Yeah. Not good. All 5 of his kids are now in their 60s, and they all still hold this grudge today. I would too. Oh well. But later on, my grandfather continued his work in these different secret programs, and he had a lot of work on different reconnaissance and radar systems. He was an old school radar guy, and he was just the man to help with the invention of stealth technology. So the Skunk Works team brought him aboard, started working in secrecy, and we don't know a lot about what he did during his time on the Skunk Works, but we have a few tidbits that I'll share with you here. He had a hand in the design work of this airplane. This plane is codename Have Blue. This plane represents something we've been trying to do since World War II, anti-radar technology. This plane finally got the recipe right. There's another project he worked on that is a lot more obscure. This is a well-known thing. But this little thing, this is codename Senior Prom. I think somebody was having fun with the code names. The code name Senior Prom. It was a shrunken version of that same Half Blue. They took the pilot out, put a bomb inside, and it was a stealth cruise missile launched from the underwing pylon of the C-130. My grandfather had a lot of design work in this. And unfortunately, the Air Force never made this missile operational. It wouldn't fit in the bomb bay of conventional bomber airplanes. But all of this research and development would lead to the operational F-117 Nighthawk, the stealth fighter. This airplane changed air warfare more than any other in the last 50 years. You can't see it. It's very difficult to see. Later on, my grandfather worked with the Trident missile program. Trident missiles are down under the ocean right now in their submarines, ready to launch just in case, and God forbid that ever happens, but they're ready to go. We don't know exactly what my grandfather did on this program. We think he had something to do with the re-entry vehicle, because when they were flight testing this missile, they had the dummy bombs in their re-entry vehicles launching from off the coast of California, flying up into space over Hawaii, and then re-entering over a little island called Kwajalein Atoll. My grandfather was out there in the middle of the Pacific on that island watching these re-entry vehicles during their test flights. This was during the height of the Cold War. And my grandfather, as he watched this in the middle of the night, he saw these things in space start their re-entry, splash down in the ocean. And he said, "This is what the end of the world will look like, except there will be more of them." Mm-hmm. It's an amazing thought. And fortunately, the Soviet Union fell in a peaceful way. And I don't think anybody at the time could have guessed that would happen. But it did. The world didn't end. So I came along. I was born in 1990. And one of my earliest memories is my mother explaining to me why we couldn't afford as much film as I wanted for this little camera. I've been taking pictures my whole life. I mean, it's since I was 13 years old, there hasn't been a single day gone by that didn't have a little camera in my pocket. I always have one. When digital photography came along, I could finally take as many pictures as I wanted. All I needed was AA batteries, and that was a huge revelation for me. Pretty much since then, I've had a camera in my pocket. Another memory I have just burned into my memory from an early age. When I was 7 years old, I watched the first ever flight of this airplane right here. That's it, the F-22. That F-22 program was the last project that my grandfather touched with the Lockheed Company. And so when the first flight happened, he was invited to bring his family, me, down to the flight line and watch that thing take off for the very first time. Now that's inspiring to a 7-year-old budding aviator. Yeah, it's amazing. But another thing I remember distinctly from that day was the F-22, but also the chase plane. That's an F-16 there, and look at that white and orange paint job. Gorgeous paint job on that thing. That F-16 was louder than the F-22, and that F-16 had this big 12-foot long flame shooting out the back end, and the F-22 didn't have that. So in my 7-year-old mind, I like that F-16 the best. And remember that paint job, because it comes into play a little later on, that orange and white paint scheme there. An image burned into my mind from the age of 9. This little view right here. This is the airport in Rome, Georgia. And on that airport, my grandparents and parents got together enough money to take me on my first orientation flight lesson. At 9 years old, I was just tall enough to reach the rudder pedals, you know, and they gave me that first flight lesson, and I've never wanted to be on the ground since. It was a big deal, you know. I remember flying around, maneuvering around Rome, Georgia, and the instructor there had a big thermos full of coffee, and he opens it up and starts drinking this boiling hot coffee, steaming right next to me, and I said, wow, he really trusts me flying this thing. Yeah, it felt good. Good confidence booster. And then right after that, I looked over my shoulder where my father and my grandfather were sitting, and they were white-knuckling it in the back seat, holding on for dear life. So that brought my confidence level down a little bit. But later on, I found myself in the state of Idaho. We moved out there, and my first job was cleaning those same MiGs that were trying to shoot my grandpa down. Cold War's over. You know, a lot of people own these MiGs privately, and that was the case out at my little airport in Idaho. I worked on the flight line out there, and it was my duty to keep the airplanes shiny.
What airport was that?
It was Driggs, Idaho, Teton Aviation, southeast Idaho, right across the Tetons from Jackson, Wyoming. So, beautiful, beautiful place. That's our MiG-15. That's our MiG-17. And that is me. I was 17 years old. I finally soloed for the first time. And there's a lot of aviators here. You remember your first solo for your entire life. Flying the airplane for the first time, the instructor wasn't in the seat. That thing climbed like a rocket. It was amazing. And I was so excited, I was shouting my checklist, fuel on both, primer in and locked, all this stuff. I was just shouting in the cockpit, flying this thing for the first time alone. And of course, when you key the microphone, you go back to your cool pilot voice. Driggs traffic, Skyhawk 800. But when the mic wasn't on, I was just shouting the whole time. I was fortunate out there to learn how to fly gliders in the Tetons. And our little airport, one of the other planes that made sure it was shiny all the time was this extra 300L aerobatic plane. This thing is a rocket. It's an aerobatic monster. It goes up to 10 Gs, positive and negative, just fine. And it's really an experience flying that thing. Here's another plane that was my responsibility to keep it nice and shiny. This is an L-39, and look at that paint job. It's the same orange and white paint job with the big ED on the tail. Because this plane was evaluated by the test pilot school out at Edwards Air Force Base. It's almost like something was calling me out west to the desert, Edwards Air Force Base. At this young age, I was just enraptured by planes like the Concorde, high-speed, high-altitude flight. Wearing your short sleeves, New York to, the UK in just 2 hours, drinking champagne. I mean, incredible. Mach 2. Planes like the Blackbird, they inspired me, Mach 3, fastest and highest flying jet airplane in history. And the fastest and highest flying plane of all, the Space Shuttle. This was one of my favorite planes growing up. Now, that launch pad there it's pad 39A out at Kennedy Space Center. It's the most famous launch pad in the world because every person that walked on the moon started their journey right there at pad 39A. That is Space Shuttle Atlantis lifting off of this pad on the STS-117 mission. That was an important mission for me because I watched that liftoff on TV. And I went out in my backyard in Idaho. I looked up and I saw this. I don't know if you can see the little streak right across. I took this picture in my backyard. That is Space Shuttle Atlantis on orbit. Seeing the space shuttle from your backyard in space really does a lot for the mind of a young aviator. But later on, I watched all those Concords go into museums. I watched the sunset on that Blackbird program, and I watched Space Shuttle Atlantis land for the last time ever. Remember old Launch Pad 39A? It fell dormant. It started to rust away, and for years, nothing was happening out there. And I kind of felt like I had to do something. So I went out here. This is Rogers Dry Lake Bed at Edwards Air Force Base. Some say it's God's gift to the United States Air Force. It's a big, hard, dry lake bed, 44 square miles, perfect for emergency landings. You can land any place on this lake bed. And so, because of that, Edwards Air Force Base settled there. And if you're not familiar with Edwards history, almost every great advance in aerospace history has happened in the sky over that lake bed. The first time people exceeded the altitude in airplanes of 100,000 feet, 200,000 feet, and 300,000 feet happened in the sky right over that place. Of course, Chuck Yeager broke Mach 1 in the sky over that place. Scott Crossfield broke Mach 2. Later on, people would break Mach 3, 4, 5, 6, and unmanned planes went all the way up to Mach 9 for the first time over that lake bed. Oh, by the way, the shuttle had its first landing on that lake bed, and it broke Mach 25 when it came in. High-speed, high-altitude flight. This is the place to be. Remember that paint job? This is the home of that paint job. This is the test pilot school fleet. Yeah, I felt right at home. I went to work volunteering for the museum at Edwards. I was cleaning planes again, but this time they weren't paying me. But that was okay, because look at the stuff I got to clean, the Blackbird aircraft, Happy to do it. And while I was out there in the desert, I started visiting lots of airplane crash sites. I would go out and learn more about the people that gave their lives to make our airplanes safer today. I went out to the ruins of Pancho Barnes' Happy Bottom Riding Club. If you watch the Right Stuff movie, that's the bar where all the test pilots go after a hard day's work in the sky over Edwards. Bob Oehl, Chuck Yeager, Scott Crossfield. Started volunteering at Blackbird Air Park in Palmdale, making sure these planes were clean and doing docent work, talking to the people that visited the air park. I also went to work volunteering under Space Shuttle Endeavour. It's out at Los Angeles at the California Science Center. And I can't tell you how many hundreds of hours I've stood underneath that thing telling stories from the shuttle program. But I'll tell you, volunteer work doesn't pay the bills. As much fun as it is, and it's so enriching, it doesn't pay the bills. And so I started applying to work in different places. And where else am I going to apply? NASA. You know, I applied for the first time out in California. There's a NASA center there, and they didn't call me back. And I applied again, and still no word back. And again and again and again. And finally, my application went through, and I got a job out at Kennedy Space Center. Yeah. Talk about a childhood dream. Being a part of the team that supports all the launches out there is a real privilege, you know. Thousands of people get together to make those rockets fly, and every single one of them is a critical piece to the puzzle out there. And I'm happy to say that my team right now, we are restoring this dream of high-speed, high-altitude flight to the world. Just a couple weeks ago, we launched this thing. That is Launch Pad 39A. For the first time in 5.5 years, there's fire on that pad again, and we are all so proud. That is a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket lifting off of 39A. Little nose cone on top there is actually rather big. It's about the size of an SUV. And they're sending that capsule up to the International Space Station. In fact, it's attached to the space station right now. The astronauts have their fresh fruit and new science experiments and such, thanks to that flight. But when we launched her, the second stage continued on to carry that capsule up toward the space station. But the first stage of that rocket turned around in space, and it came back and landed softly on Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. There she is coming back. Now, if that isn't restoring the dreams of high-speed, high-altitude flight, I don't know what will. Launching, going into space, and landing softly with its rocket motors, all in 10 minutes. And that sonic boom coming in, dragging a boom from the edge of space going Mach 7. That was the most beautiful sound I've ever heard in my life. Boom, boom, you know, shook everything. Now, this is incredible. This is happening right now. But in a very short period of time, and we're thinking September, just next year, September 2018, we're getting ready to launch this thing. This is called the Space Launch System Rocket, SLS. Remember this name. It'll be a household name soon, because when we launch this thing for the first time ever in September next year, it'll be the most powerful rocket ever flown in history. Those old Saturn V rockets had about 7.5 million pounds of thrust. This will exceed 8 million pounds of thrust. That's real heavy. Now, that first test flight next year, we're still planning the flight. But in about 20 years, on the shoulders of this same rocket, we will send people to this place, Mars. In the mid-2030s, we're going to put the first footsteps on the red planet. So right now, there's a few young folks in this audience. If you're within the age group of 7 to 17 years old, raise your hand. Just a few. Excellent. You are the generation that's going to put the first footsteps on the red planet. Okay. Who wants to go to Mars? Anybody? Who would like to go?
I'd like to send some people.
Who wants to send somebody to Mars? I always get more hands on the second one. I don't know why they. Well, you know, going back to the beginning, people say it's luck. I don't think so. I think we control our destiny. Institutions like Wings of Dreams here serve to inspire these future generations, and maybe you'll be a little inspired by the collection that you're going to see a little later on. But I think we're ultimately responsible for what we do here on Earth, and I'm proud to be here with all of you today, forwarding that dream of high-speed, high-altitude flight. So thank you for the privilege of speaking with you today. Thanks a lot.